Welcome to Ask Cadence, episode 2. I feel like we should have a little bit of a celebration that we're back together a second week. I'm back at the round table. This is Pete Wright, sitting here with Jay Christensen. Jay, hello.
Good morning, Pete.
Good morning. And Scott Lissert, welcome back to the show.
Hi, Pete. Good morning.
Good to see you both again. You're looking dashing, as usual. We have a second gorilla-sized project problem that we're going to tackle today. Now, this one, again, is not necessarily in the form of a question. So, Jay, I'm going to ask you to eliminate this for us. But from the project problem card, project with ill-conceived scope. What does that mean?
What happens in this particular situation or scenario is that the project team is formed and they're not certain exactly what it is that they should be doing. There are inconsistencies or contradictions in the scope that cannot be resolved from the knowledge of the project team. And they feel like the project purpose has not been thoroughly thought through properly. And they feel like that they're given a fuzzy definition of what to accomplish, but they're not really knowledgeable about exactly what they would like to see as a result.
You're saying they've sort of inherited a project from leadership that doesn't really understand what they want to implement.
Yeah, and what many times happens is that project teams, when they are given an assignment, it is an assignment that has been conceived as an idea. But that's about as much that has happened to that idea. There's been no further definition or studying or researching exactly what this idea entails. So the person with the idea perhaps is positioned in the organization sufficiently high enough that they can state an idea and then launch a project effort to begin implementing that idea straight away.
And sometimes what can happen is you'll have more than one key stakeholder on a project, and each one has their own idea about what they might want to see in terms of scope. And the initial project champion may then put both of those understandings in the initial scope statement, not knowing that they may even be in conflict with each other.
Oh, so it becomes this sort of project battle royale politically in the organization.
It can.
Is that where you're going? Yeah.
Right.
What have you seen with companies that deal with this really particularly artfully? How do they get around it?
Yes, what is the best way to deal with this particular situation is to take the idea through the project life cycle. And after the idea is conceived, what we really need to do is see if there is a sponsor who will either pay for the next phase or pay for the entire project. If no sponsor comes forward, then the idea is effectively dead at that point. If a sponsor comes forward, then the next step would be to further flesh out the idea. And this is what occurs in the study phase of the project life cycle. The purpose here is to bring more definition to the idea, but still not completely define the idea. And the purpose to flesh out the idea is to find significant problems or risks that would render the idea not worthwhile going forward at this point.
Okay, I want to make sure I understand what we're talking about here. You inherit a project that is ill-defined, and as a project manager, you're going to start shopping for better project sponsorship.
Correct.
Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
How does one handle that politically in an organization? What happened to the original sponsor? I mean, I'm looking for a real-world application of how this plays out.
Yeah, and if the original sponsor is fine, as long as this person is willing and capable to invest in the next phase or invest in the entire project. Now, the thing here is that many times the project manager is given the project to plan and execute, and they discover that the scope has not been thoroughly defined. So what they need to do is collect the information necessary to define the project scope. And if the original sponsor is still intact, that's fine, no problem with that at all. But if the sponsor perhaps is not at a high enough level in the organization, then the project manager may need to find additional sponsors or even form a steering committee with one person that's chairing that committee.
Well, that's interesting. In fact, it comes back to where it seems like where we're going is that eventually the project may, as it gains definition, becomes a different project than what the original sponsor may have intended.
It could, and this is a case where the project manager needs to recognize that the scope definition initially may be inadequate and decide not to begin implementing the project with that inadequate scope definition. So these steps that Jay's been talking about here today need to be followed in order to get the project plan in good enough shape to begin to implement it.
In fact, if the idea is validated in the study phase, what then should happen is a concerted, deliberate, defined effort to further research the business value and the business merit of the project. And this occurs during the research phase. And this phase, one of its primary purposes is to define thoroughly from the customer's viewpoint the product or service description. And it is at this juncture that the major deliverables of the scope are discovered, discussed, selected as a result of identifying who are the major stakeholders of the project if it were to be implemented. And these major stakeholders need to agree and confirm that the scope as it has been discovered, defined, and filtered is the right scope for the project.
You know, Jay, I think that we should clarify what we mean when we say scope here, so that we are talking about scope in terms of the features and the functions and the components or the documentation that will be in the operating environment after the project team is finished.
That's correct. And along...
How does that contrast between... I'm trying to figure out what you were defining scope against.
Well, scope could be defined different ways in different organizations. And the way PMI defines scope is this way, and it's one of the key inputs to the project plan.
Correct, Scott. And in addition, the scope would also ideally contain the criteria for success. And what is desirable is to know what is not in scope, what is the boundary, what is the outer limit of the scope. But in the research phase, it is particularly important to identify and list those items that you mentioned, such as features, functions, modules, documentation, processes, etc., that will be delivered by the project team into the operating environment.
Excellent, gents. This is a great reminder, and one I think that many, particularly informal and small projects, neglect, that may end up having a significant impact on the organization, is to implement these and walk through that think, study, and research phase from the beginning.
Yes, and I would add to that, Pete, that one of the questions that the project manager can ask when they are assigned a project is, what documents have been collected in the previous phases prior to my being assigned to the project? And if no documents come forward at that point, then it is a key indicator for the project manager that there may need to be some previous phase work completed prior to effectively defining the scope for planning purposes.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you both for sitting down. This has been Ask Cadence, and we will be back next week with another gorilla-sized project problem to tackle at the round table. Thanks, gents.
Thank you.
Thank you.